Okay, let's continue with culturally competent research. I believe in your book it's chapter 5. Different groups use services differently, and they expect different things and will interpret and react differently in the research process, to the research process. Being culturally competent as a researcher implies becoming aware of and responding appropriately to the various populations we intend to generalize our research findings to. Some studies seek wide minority representation, and for good reason. If you want the National Institute of Health money to fund you, for example, and by the way, there is plenty of it for research, and hopefully will be even more with our new administration, you'll have to include a wide range of diverse groups. That is the rule. And it helps to have representatives of such groups. Oh, sorry, this is moving around. It helps to have representatives of such groups put it in writing that the research is a really good idea, that it's necessary, that it's needed for particular communities to have equal opportunity for services, for social services. Other studies focus on one group or another. Sorry, this is so jumpy. And these require a great deal of cultural competence, something that has to be demonstrated before it will be approved by the ICSW IRB, by the way, for example. With cultural competence, a researcher could, without cultural competence, a researcher could inadvertently harm subjects with insensitive questioning or insensitive interpretations of findings. Measurement especially is scrutinized to see if questions will be understood by minority subjects. The way a researcher asks the question has to be sensitive too. If a subject doesn't understand a question, he might answer randomly, threatening the reliability of the instrument. Random error, as you learned last time we met, implies that results can't be replicated. The measurement tool is unreliable. If the measurement tool is unreliable, your research is no good. If a subject thinks that a particular word means something that it doesn't, and that word is repeated throughout, then answers will not be valid. The measurement tool won't be measuring what it is supposed to measure. It isn't a valid instrument, meaning the findings aren't valid either. When we analyze our results and interpret data, we have to be extremely cautious not to generalize to groups we haven't included as subjects. And we have to be careful how we jump to conclusions, lest we insult an entire ethnic population. I like the example of the finding that inner city minority kids are less able to delay their gratification than their Caucasian counterparts. To interpret this as a genetic deficiency of trait reinforces prejudice. Better to interpret this as an adaptive response to an economically deprived environment. We have to be careful not to generalize data on males to females, on straights to gays, and vice versa. What this means is that these groups should be included in samples. They really need to be represented, and you'd better have a good reason not to have them. Another thing to be sure to check out when including ethnic groups is the degree to which the sample within your sample is acculturated. Know what that means for the exam. Essentially, it is about how a minority group changes when it is in constant contact with a more dominant majority culture. There are many ways to measure this. A good literature review should turn up many good instruments. It's worth it to take a look at them, although you don't need it for your exam. Most important, and I hinted at this earlier, we have to be culturally competent if we are using minorities in our studies, because we have to avoid, at all costs, harm. We don't want to ask insensitive questions or imply that values are irrelevant. We want to avoid injury. We should study the history of diverse cultures, should watch our own ethnocentric biases, and learn the social mores, rules about verbal and nonverbal behavior before we begin to interview people. This is no small task, and I suggest you take the opportunity, if you can find one, to take some classes on it if you haven't already. I also love the Reuben and Babby example, by the way, that African Americans are a little suspicious of researcher, that they see us as taking, not giving back. This is just so African to me, to see this reciprocity thing. And Native Americans might, if you're interviewing them, they may have to check with their tribal chiefs. Now there's something that would impress an IRB committee. I've got to check with the tribal chief before I've got to put that in my consent form. Okay. For your exam, I'll probably ask you to make up a little project about a particular ethnic group and defend your cultural competence. For more on this, read pages 101 to the end of the chapter. The rest of what you need from this chapter, you really just heard from me. So just 101 to the end is all you're responsible for reading if you actually got what I've been talking about in the last 6 minutes.